Hi everyone, I'm Ashanti Omkar, BBC broadcaster and film critic. Welcome to The Bottom Drawer, Books That Changed My Life, a series that is part of the Bagri Foundation's Change theme for 2021. This is the second season, and we feature writers whose UK debuts have just been published. We ask them about the books that inspired them to write, hinge around their earliest efforts and moments or books that changed their life. Welcoming the wonderful Neema Shah. I've been blown away by her book. She was born and raised in London and has written this evocative book about East African Asians, having made several trips herself to East Africa growing up. And I can relate to that. I grew up in West Africa, so that connection is there. Her book, Kololo Hill, it takes a deep dive into immigrant lives and their trials and tribulations. Welcome, Neema.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting.
Totally my pleasure. Now, let's dive straight in. What is the unpublished piece at the bottom of your drawer?
So, this was actually a bit of a tricky one to answer because Kololo Hill is the first novel I'd written and it was published, and I realised that that's quite rare. The one thing I would say is I started writing a thriller. Meanwhile, when I was looking for an agent, I was thinking, well, what happens if I don't get an agent? What if I don't get published with this book? Maybe I should try something else. Maybe I'll try and get self-published. And I just decided I don't care what happens. I want to be published one way or another. So I did start writing a thriller. So obviously very much more commercial. Um, and it was fine. I wrote about 50,000 words. I would say my heart wasn't fully in it. And it was just, yeah, like just a very compelling sort of, there was a hook to it, set in the film industry and all the rest of it. But aside from that, I don't actually have that much at the bottom of my drawer because I didn't start writing till I was 37. And so I suppose I just felt like there was so much time to make up for that I just ended up getting on with it. I am sure that if I'd started writing in my 20s, there would be not a drawer, but maybe a cupboard full of books waiting to either be looked at or burnt. Who knows?
Wow, but a thriller, that sounds really exciting. And I can see how you've used that pace in Kololo Hill. So I think that was a great kind of preamble to what you've created. So those early efforts, I mean, what kind of compelled you to then create this story, and what did all that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I kind of slightly stumbled upon being an author because I only started writing because of a short creative writing course that I was doing. So I work in marketing and I really wanted to improve my editing skills. I thought, okay, I'll do this short writing course. And I had forgotten how much I loved to write. And suddenly I had such a buzz for it. And I'd always thought when I was younger, it was really surprising that there weren't any books about East African Asians, or at least ones that I'd come across. And so I thought, maybe I should try and write something. So at first I was just writing short stories around East African Asians, and in particular the Ugandan Asian expulsion of 1972 and the characters that sort of started to develop. And then I thought maybe I can make this into a novel. I'm going to try and make this into a novel. So I carried on writing. So that was really how it came about. But even as I was writing it, I was quite worried that maybe there was a reason why no one had published a book about East African Asians before. You know, maybe no one was interested in reading that kind of story. And it surprised me because I wanted to read that sort of story, but then I thought maybe others didn't. And as it happens, I think there's clearly is an interest in it, and I've now been published, but also that it's not just people from East African Asian backgrounds that want to hear these stories. There are British people that have spoken to me. There are obviously people from other parts of Asia and India who are really keen to hear this story as well. So yeah, I think it's just sometimes we almost tell ourselves certain things to convince ourselves not to continue. And I'm glad I kind of just pushed past that and carried on.
Wow, of course, I totally resonate with that because when you're writing that first big book, it's like the what you feel inside is that nobody will want it. And now that you know people want it, I'm sure you'll write more, which is a great
Yeah,
thing.
I think you're so right. I think writing a first novel of any description is such an act of bravery. And, you have no idea whether you're going to be published. And I get that people say that, writing a second book is difficult. And yeah, it's difficult. Each book is difficult for sure. But you already know that someone has taken a chance on you in terms of an agent, probably, and publishers. And now, obviously, there are readers that are reading it. So yeah, now it's spurring me on, this idea that people are reading it and they engage with it and talk about my characters as if they're real. And it's still very surreal. I can't get over it. I've been published for about 2 months now, but I still haven't been able to get used to that. It's amazing. So yeah, I think it's a bit of an addiction, really. Once you start writing, you get into it. Writing in itself is an addiction because it's so great. But then, hearing other people talk about the stories and hear what they have to say about it and what they think of your story and what they think about the situations around it, it's really compelling.
It really is. And what I loved about it is how you then brought this story to the UK, and it was like what British Asians are going through. And so there's quite a lot of beautiful juxtapositions, I guess, between those two lives, and how you've managed to bring all that together for your first book. It is incredible, really. I mean, I have to say that what you brought about is absolutely beautiful. Now, would you say that while you were writing this, your style was changing a bit before it even got to the editing stage?
Do you know, that's such an interesting question because it's my first book. I wouldn't say my style has changed so much during writing this book, but I am starting to see. I mean, I'd like to think I've evolved as a writer. So with book two, um, I suppose there is a slight maturity to what I think anyway. So I'm writing book two at the moment. I've written some drafts. I'm starting to edit it. And there is a difference. And I am very proud, obviously, of Kololo Hill. And I'm lucky that people have responded so well to it and readers really do seem to enjoy it. But I suppose, a friend of mine said this, it's like we don't, as great as it is to have a great first debut book, we wouldn't keep writing unless we thought we could get better. And so I hope that I'm getting better with the second book. So I suppose I think my style has changed in that I've gained a bit of confidence, and I'm also perhaps less hesitant about writing about certain issues, certain situations, writing about sex, if I'm honest, because I think I was quite conscious of how many people were going to read the first one, and in particular my family. And I come from quite a liberal family, but even then, the idea of them reading certain things just fills me with dread. But I kind of feel now that I just need to be honest and true to myself and the story and the characters. So in that sense, I think it's changed, yeah, with book two for sure.
Wow. And was there like a moment or a book that changed your life and almost pivoted you into becoming a writer yourself? And what was it and why?
Yes, and I'd say that I had a very slow progress because as I said, I didn't know I wanted to be a writer till I was 37. It wasn't something that was even a consideration for me. But I've obviously grown up reading books. And actually, if I hadn't read, the classics, the Midnight's Children and Andrea Levy's Small Island, Arundhati Roy, all of those sorts of writers when I was younger, and Zadie Smith, all of those writers, if I hadn't seen their writing on bookshelves, on my bookshelves, I would have thought there's definitely not a place for me because no one else is reading this sort of or writing this sort of fiction. And I appreciate that, now when we look back, that sort of literature can sometimes be perceived as a very specific type of literature, and it's quite narrow in terms of it's all about immigrants. But I think there are a lot of immigrant stories that still need to be told. What has obviously happened since then is that there are now books and stories being told about lots of different things, by people who are British Asian, who are Indian, and that's brilliant. But I don't think we should forget all the immigrant stories that haven't seen the light of day yet. And I think there's quite a lot more to come.
100% agree with you. I mean, Nitin Sawhney himself has made an album called Immigrants, and
Yeah.
it's being celebrated in a big way in the next, well, this year and next year. And it is quite interesting to see these different stories. I've met so many people who've grown up in East Africa. You yourself, you've been traveling
Yeah.
backwards and forwards. So you have that almost dual identity in many ways. And it's about capturing that. And those moments, you're right. I mean, this is one of many books that should be written. And I'm glad that writers like yourself are saying, I'm going to delve in and do this. In fact, how long did it take for you to write Kololo Hill?
Yeah, so I started writing it in 2015. I had a draft within a couple of years, but then obviously it takes time to get an agent and then you get a publisher. So I suppose from the first word to sending it off to print, I'd say it's probably taken about 4 years. And yeah, but you know, publishing moves slowly, I've got to admit. And obviously I had a full-time job on top of that, so it probably could have been faster if it hadn't been for that.
But actually, my expression was more like, actually, you've done quite a lot in 4 years.
Oh, right, yeah.
The process itself, could have taken a lot longer.
True.
I know people who waited 10 years from
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
to publishing, but you've got stunning. I mean, this book is just absolutely beautiful. Everything from what you've written to the cover,
I
you
know that I'm lucky with that cover. It's amazing. I even like, okay, obviously I can see myself now. Even looking at it now, it still gives me a thrill to see it. They did such an amazing job on the cover. I'm very lucky.
it is a beautiful thing. Now, who are the writers that inspired you, and why should we read their work?
Yeah, so I'd definitely say some of the writers that I mentioned for sure. I mean, Midnight's Children is one of my favorite books of all time. I loved the play, the language play, and obviously that's an older book now. Some of my other favorite, I don't necessarily have favorite writers. I think I can admire a lot of writers, but it's actually specific books that I particularly resonate with. So Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, and it's so interesting that you're talking about sort of the thriller pace and literary fiction, because she does that. Her novel is set in Victorian London, but it's very much a page turner, even though it's very literary. I can't remember if that one, but certainly some of her books have been nominated for or even won Booker prizes. So she does this amazing thing where it is literally, you cannot put it down. The most amazing twists. I know people talk a lot about twists and books, and the twists you don't see coming. Honestly, there's a twist in this book which I've not seen topped by any book. And I'd love to be able to do that in literary fiction. It's very hard, I think, to do in any book. But yeah, I'd love to be able to try and do that. So that she very much inspires me. And I've also recently started reading a lot more of Nikita Gill's poetry and her novel in verse, yeah, The Girl and the Goddess. That really spoke to me because although I've read Indian subcontinent culture fiction and British Asian fiction, there's something about her book in particular that really resonated with me as an Asian woman. And to be able to connect with people and readers like that's an ambition. So yeah, I'd say that I also admire her for sure.
Wow. I love her work. I love
Yeah.
everything she's doing. And I recently spoke to Anushka Shankar, who has
Yeah.
taken her poem and turned that into a
Yes, I saw that. It's amazing. I
just
loved that.
you haven't, anyone who hasn't heard it, I can highly recommend it because that speaks to me as an Asian woman. I've been through a lot of what she has described in that, and you're right, that poetic quality. In fact, what kind of helped you get the prose so evocative in your book? Was
Oh, thank you.
that prompted you, or how did that come together?
Yeah, I think I suppose, I don't want to sound big. I guess I just have a different way of looking at the world. And I guess that's what a lot of writers do. And I just seem to be able to see patterns and things because similes and metaphors, that is a lot of what you're trying to make connections in your writing. But I think also I know some writers who don't like to read other fiction when they're writing. I'm the opposite. I'm inspired by other fiction, not just literary fiction, but lots of types of fiction, and to absorb those ideas and twist them and think about them that way. But also not just fiction. I'm inspired by a lot of different things. So music is another one, and how a piece of music makes you feel and how you then translate that into description. So I suppose it's those things that have helped me. I can't really explain it. It is a bit like alchemy, isn't it? When you write, I don't know where it comes from. And I think this is probably true of a lot of writers. Sometimes you'll be writing and you'll surprise yourself at what you write, and you don't really know where it comes from. It comes from the ether, and I know I'm probably sounding a bit out there now, but I can't fully explain. As much as I'm a writer and I'm supposed to be able to communicate these things, I can't fully explain how these ideas come to me. It's a very strange process, but it seems to work, so I'm not going to complain.
I'd like to take you back to your trips to Uganda because having lived in West Africa myself, I have very, my memories are very golden. They're very rose tinted. I think of those as these lovely days, but the reality of those lives probably weren't as rose tinted. How do you feel about that? Like,
That's such an interesting question. I think most of my trips back to Kenya, in particular, where my mum's family are, and as you said, we did a lot of family trips growing up, and I love it. I see it as my second home, in fact. A lot of it's rose tinted, but then I suppose, a lot of the time we were staying in family accommodation as opposed to hotels. We went over when my granddad died, and so I suppose that it's not quite as rose tinted in that sense, but it's, at the same time, it was holidays. We were in Kololo Hill, sitting by the beach, all of those sorts of things. But what makes it less rose tinted for me, I guess, was going over and staying in people's houses where people do have workers, have servants, and they're well treated. But I certainly found the families that I know and lived and stayed with. But it is quite an unusual circumstance for someone coming over from England, where the most you might have usually is a cleaner at home, and that kind of uneasiness that I felt as well of having people working for you and looking after you in the home. So I suppose I did have a slightly different perspective on it from that point of view. And then again, through going to Uganda, through researching what had happened with the Ugandan Asian expulsion, gave me certainly less of a rose tinted look on it, because you then sort of peel behind the layers and see the history and the politics of, unfortunately, kind of beautiful, amazing country with amazing people, and then the things that have happened.
sure, totally. I mean, growing up in Africa, I had learned a certain amount of history even at a young age, and that was a very scary thought of what had happened to the Asians in Uganda. And I think even talking about it now, I can feel those kind of
Yeah,
like a goosebump sensation of, oh, And did you watch Mississippi Masala? Did
yeah.
films like that kind of also work on your psyche?
Yeah, I love that film. I feel like it should be better known, because it's such a brilliant film, obviously, and it has Denzel Washington, and I've forgotten, is it Sarita?
Rita Chowdhury,
Yeah,
that
she's amazing, and they're both amazing in it, and it's so groundbreaking in many ways. So I did watch things like that. There's not many films in particular. There's Last King of Scotland, but it's a very different perspective. I watched a lot of documentaries. That was quite helpful, and also there's an amazing. It's called the Exiles project that was done by SOAS, part of the University of London, and they did, for the 40th anniversary of the expulsion, hours and hours of first-hand interviews from people that were expelled, and that in particular gave me that real sense of what happened. But I absolutely agree about the goosebumps, because unfortunately politics around the world, there's a lot of links between what's happening in the book and what's happening now, as you say. Certainly when Trump was in power, and the Mexican Wall, and all those things that were being talked about, things like that being talked about in Britain, in India, and lots of other places. So unfortunately, it is all too topical, and that's probably why it resonates so much, because it could still happen anytime.
absolutely, absolutely. I have to say that this is a book that anybody can pick up and read, and there'll be something they can resonate with, and
I
I
think
think
so.
that's a beautiful way to do this. Now, with African stories, it's always the oral tradition. A
Mm.
lot of stuff from Africa has never been written down.
Mm.
It's been passed from generation to generation, and I'm sure you heard lots of these stories from your grandparents,
Yes.
from your visits.
Yeah.
Tell me
Not,
about.
yeah, it's funny. Not, I'm sure there were, but actually these things I don't think are talked about that much. They've been talked about more recently. So my nanny, unfortunately, she has dementia, but she's very lucid now about the past. And we're also very conscious that we need to capture those stories whilst we can. So, we got the camera phone out and we have filmed her and asked her about these questions. So it's all, we remember that. For writing the book, obviously, I learned more about my parents and their upbringing. But strangely enough, I think we, the younger generation, sometimes, or certainly I did, take it for granted that these things just happen. They just came over here and then they started again and that was it. And actually, it's just really not what happened at all. There's so many different things that sort of led to that. So yeah, I suppose that was really helpful, listening to those sorts of stories. And I've learned a lot more about my family upbringing. So, you know, my grandparents went over during World War II from India to Kenya and Tanzania, which in and of itself is a story, and I've tried to weave some of that into the book. But yeah, that's why it was so important, because, you know, I think you talked earlier about this dual identity. For me, I have a triple identity because of India and Africa and England. But even in Indian culture, I suppose there is quite a big oral tradition. You know, there are parts where, especially in Bengali tradition, there's a lot more written down. I'm not as familiar with the Gujarati side of things, but it's certainly not something that's part of my family. So it is important. It was really important for me to write this story and to get it down on paper whilst it's in living memory. And I talk a bit about that. It's one of the themes of the book, you know, this idea of who's writing our stories and how important it is to capture them. And I think older generations think it's not that interesting or that fantastic, and yet it's extraordinary what they went through. And maybe younger generations, as is normal, you know, we're not as necessarily as interested until we get a bit older.
Very true. And how many of those characters in your book do you have similar people in real life?
Yeah, so there are definitely inspirations. I have to say, my Asha, who is recently married, and she's the key protagonist in the book, and she's married to Pran, and there are certain secrets in their marriage. So Asha is loosely based on my mum. My mum doesn't have that kind of marriage, I should say, but she's you know, I think there's this thing that Asian women are seen as timid and meek and quiet, and it's really not my interpretation or my experience. And so Asha is very sort of forthright. You know, she's a product of her environment and her culture to an extent, but she's not like that. And then Jaya as well. So she's the matriarch, the older woman, and she's partly based on my maternal grandmother. Um, and you know, she's like 5 foot nothing. She's tiny, and she is very traditional. You know, she will wear her chundri over her head if she's talking to a man. There's those elements, and yet she's probably one of the strongest characters in the book. And it's this idea of just portraying people as they really are. So again, she's loosely based on my grandmother. She's not exactly a replica, but you know, I am inspired, as most writers are, around about people around us, I suppose. So yeah.
Wow. Now, you tried to run away to join a circus. You did it, I think.
I did run away to join a circus. It's not quite as exciting. That's just my writer twist on it. But basically, I entered an internship program that let you go and work in New York for a year. And they placed you in all sorts of places. I mean, all my friends seem to get places like JP Morgan and Citibank. But they decided, because I had a marketing background, they put me in the events team at the Big Apple Circus, which is a real circus in New York. It's actually really famous in New York. You know, it had celebrities going there and stuff like that, but it's a regular circus. It travels and everything. So that's when I said I ran away to join the circus. Yes, I went to live in New York for a year and I worked for a circus, but only in the office, unfortunately.
So you didn't go and try any of those.
I didn't get to try trapeze flying or anything like that, unfortunately.
Oh my gosh, that's interesting. It's just so interesting. And, you know, in terms of your own career as being, you know, into television, digital, brand strategy, and all of
Yeah.
those things, and then becoming a writer, are you
Mm.
able to now juggle these two things, or will you be giving one up for the other?
Well, I'm going to continue working on both. I think that there's two elements to that. Now, obviously, if I got some major, massive film deal or something, would I reconsider? Possibly. But actually, having a day job that isn't sitting and writing in your own home and not really interacting with other people is not that conducive to a writer's writing, in that you need to be having experiences and you need to be, I think, interacting with others. So I suspect I'll always do some marketing work in some form or another. And I also just like the idea of having different sort of portfolio careers. But yeah, I can't see myself stopping writing anytime soon, and I can't see myself stopping marketing. So, and I think that there's a creative element to marketing which comes in quite handy with the writing as well. And I'm now starting to teach authors marketing skills as well. So that's come in quite handy as well, being able to integrate those two things.
Wow, I absolutely love that. I love that you're able to juggle these two things
Thank
in
you.
so beautifully. And Nima, in terms of, there's a lot of detail in the book, from food to what people wear, all of those things. Are these things that you experience yourself, that you put down on paper?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are. I mean, and there's obviously references to certain 70s clothes like bell bottoms and things like that. And I've tried not to sort of be really sort of stereotypical about it. I've tried to be sort of, appropriate to the time period in a way that feels realistic. But the food in particular, yeah, it's the stuff that I ate growing up and still continue to eat. And it was really important to me to show that, because there is Indian subcontinent food, but there is also this amalgamation of cultures. There are things like coconut mogul, which we eat, and it's mogul, so cassava, stewed in coconut milk with cumin seeds. So you can see these cultures mixing. There's also a reference to baked bean curry, which is British and Indian obviously mixed together there. But so I wanted to show that. I guess I'm an anthropologist in some ways, and I do think you can learn so much about culture and character and setting through food, through clothes. I find it really strange when people don't reference those details in books and contextualize. I find that that's what I'm interested in. It's why I travel as well as reading. So yeah, that's quite important to me.
Any favorite places you travel to aside from Africa? Because Africa itself, I mean, I've only been to, to Egypt, to Morocco, to Nigeria, and I
Yeah.
haven't seen really. That's just so tiny in such a massive continent. Tell me
Yeah.
your favorite places.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't traveled massively in Africa, Egypt and South Africa in particular, I've traveled to. But actually, I'm lucky that I was able to travel when I was younger. I backpacked around the world. And I suppose one of my favourite places was Easter Island, which is in the middle of, well, it's in between sort of Chile and then Australia, I suppose. An extraordinary place. It's the place, obviously, with the big statues, the Easter Island statues. I've never been anywhere like it on earth, and it's a very small island, as you can imagine. Everything's imported. But what was so funny was I was in a supermarket just buying some like groceries and stuff, and a man behind me, who was obviously from Easter Island, said, "Excuse me, are you Indian?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm from England, but yes, I'm Indian." And he said, "Oh, I've never met anyone from India." And I said, "Oh, well, that's fine. I've never met any Easter Islanders until I came here," because it was just such an extraordinary situation. But traveling around South America was like that. There were hardly any Indians that I ever came across. And I was kind of treated a bit like a celebrity because it was so rare. And there are Indians. There are Indians in Ecuador and Peru, but there's not many. So yeah, I've been lucky and fortunate to have a lot of experiences, but Easter Island was probably one of the most amazing.
Well, Nima, it's been such a pleasure speaking with
Thank
you.
you.
Lovely to hear your journeys, and I'm awaiting your next book. A big thank you on behalf of the Bagri Foundation. Check out the next Bottom Drawer interview as part of our program with Huba Qureshi. I actually know her, she is amazing. Interviewed by SS Hake, released on the 10th of June at 2 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And do share and tag Bagri Foundation on your socials.
Thank you.